Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Michelle DiMarzo. I'm the Curator of Education and Academic Engagement at the Fairfield University Art Museum. You have probably already heard the news that we are unfortunately going to remain closed to the non-university public this year, or at least this semester. So we will be doing all of our programs online through thequicklive.com. If you have any questions during the program, feel free to put them into the chat, either on thequicklive.com or on Facebook, whichever way you're watching, and they will be shared with me. For those of you who are familiar with the program Art in Focus, usually we are in the gallery sitting comfortably or not so comfortably, depending on how you feel about those camp stools, around the work of art that we are focused on. And in fact, the work of art that we are focusing on today, which is this Chinese votive stele dedicated by monk Zhilang from the year 548 CE, something that is generously on loan to Fairfield from Columbia University's Avery Architectural and Fine Arts Library. If we were actually able to be in the museum together, I'm going to fast forward my slide here. There we go. That's where it would be. So if you're familiar with the Bellarmine Hall galleries, this is the side rear gallery. And if you've been there before, you know the space is actually really small. So if we were able to be in the galleries, we probably wouldn't be doing this art in focus about this votive stele for the simple fact that there's just not enough room for 10 or so of us to sit comfortably around it. So we are making the best of our online reality to give a little bit of a focus to an object that it would be more difficult to focus on in the gallery itself. Thinking about how we usually run this as a conversation, which is a little bit harder when I'm talking into the camera of the laptop. But I know one of the questions that probably would be asked straight up would be, well, what is a votive stele? That's the name of this object, an unknown Chinese votive stele. Well, the two words, votive meaning something that's made as an offering, and a stele referring to the type of object this is. So the fact that you can see that it's an upright slab of rock, that's what makes it a stele. And I would also ask, if we were together, I would ask folks to try to guess how much our friend here weighs. I asked this question to my husband last night, and he's looking at the picture, and he's like, I don't know, 100, 150 pounds. And believe it or not, this, otherwise not too large piece of limestone weighs about 300 pounds. So it's much heavier than it looks. It's fairly low to the ground, and we're going to take a closer look at it. And as you come around to the side, as you might see if you were sitting on one of those camp stools, this is a stele that is carved on all four sides. So it has some very fine line engravings on the left side. You can see relief carving, meaning carving that protrudes from the surface on the front. You can see a very lengthy Chinese inscription underneath. That's giving you a little bit of a closer view so you can see how far those forms are coming out from the surface of the stele. We move around to the right side, we have more incised carving. And then even if we were in the gallery together, you just would not be able to get your head behind the stele to see what's on the back of it. So the next time you are able to come to the galleries and you're looking at the stele, you can just turn around, and on the wall right behind you, you will find a rubbing of the incised carving that's on the back of the stele. So if we come back to the main view of the object, and what we always like to do with art in focus, it's about focusing on one object, right? So we're going to focus in first on the part of this that has the relief carving on the front. And I find this to be, the perfect object to be thinking about on a rainy Thursday morning. We're looking at a depiction of Buddha seated cross-legged on a throne, flanked on either side by smaller figures that we would know to be bodhisattvas if we were familiar with Buddhist art. Bodhisattvas being humans who have gained enlightenment but have stayed until all beings reach enlightenment, flanking the Buddha. And what I love about him is just how calm he seems. So his hands, you can see, are together in front of him, and they are in a gesture signifying that he is meditating. And you can follow with your eyes these wonderfully carved lines that are forming the flowing lines of his drapery. So we think about something that is a depiction of meditation, and just I think the act of letting your eyes pass over it is also meditative as you follow the flows of the garment, showing you the body underneath, and then ending in these wonderful little ruffled folds where it's hanging over the edges of his throne. You might be able to make out that the Buddha has not one, but two halos behind him. So he has a sort of full bodied halo that's sort of in the shape of a lotus leaf. And then he has a circular disc halo that's right behind his head. So obviously, as we're looking at this, even if we came to this object, certainly I am unable to read Chinese. But if I came to this object and I had never seen a Buddhist image before and I didn't know who this person was, everything about the way this is set up would make it clear to me the person in the center is the focal point. My eyes go right to him. He's subtly larger than the two flanking figures. He's this nice pyramidal form. And if you are familiar with images of Buddhist art, you would immediately recognize Buddha, not least for his characteristic top knot, the way he's got his hair swept up onto his head. If we went back a couple of images, I'm just going to go back to the side view. You might see he has these elongated earlobes. In his life as the historical Buddha, he was a wealthy prince who gave up all of his worldly possessions. And part of his worldly goods were heavy golden jewelry and earrings that weighed down his earlobes. So becoming a characteristic sign that we know we are looking at a depiction of the Buddha. And I'll also point out while I'm looking at this view, because I think it might be a little bit easier to see than it is on the frontal view, that one of the other extraordinary aspects of this stele is not just that it's carved on all four sides or that it has this marvelous inscription that we'll talk about, but it's also that the limestone of the stele itself still has remnants of the original pigment still attached to it. So I think you can see if you look at the Bodhisattva to the right, you can see that painted halo behind it has red and yellow paint. And although it might be a little bit harder to distinguish, there's also blue. So that helps us imaginatively restore this stele to something, and then you can also see on this view a little bit of a sense of those three colors. It helps us restore it a little bit to what it would have looked like originally. And certainly you may be familiar with the concept that even in Western art, for example, from ancient Greece, we know now to originally have been painted, even though we're not still fully sure of exactly how bright the paint might have been. And similarly, we find on these Chinese Buddhist objects evidence of pigment still clinging to them, which is first of all really cool because this object was created in 548 CE, and here it is at Fairfield University, still with some of its original paint hanging onto it. I find that just really extraordinary as a monument, a marker of time and what this has passed through. And in addition to the Buddha himself, I already mentioned you can see the painted halos of the bodhisattvas that are flanking him. What I also find just extraordinary in terms of the detail and the care that was taken in sculpting this, the relief on the front, is that those two bodhisattvas are not twins of each other. They're not two of the same figure. You can see that they're making two different gestures with their hands. You can even look at their garments and see that they are represented differently. So the bodhisattva at the left has these concentric circles that are sort of sketching out folds of the drapery. And the figure on the right has more of a swag pattern going across the front of the drapery. So it's just an extraordinary amount of detail that's given to you. And of course, it's detail within a much larger object with a lot more on it. I think one of the really cool things about this sculpture is how much writing is on it. This is a really long inscription. As I said, do not speak Chinese. Luckily, it was exhibited in a show at Columbia, and they translated the inscription, which I've included here. So if we were in person, I'd be handing it around in our little handouts. I won't read the whole thing, but the beginning statement, the enlightened spirit touches all sentient beings like rain, moistening lives at all levels. Shakyamuni preached in the Jetavana Park. Later, he rode the wind to reach the Vulture Peak. All were inspired by his teaching. In China, the light of the Buddha's teaching again shines. We build stupas to mark our devotion, and we create images to express our dedication to the order. We also transcribe his holy words in the hope that his teaching could be handed down for 1,000 years. And as you can see, it goes on for quite a while. And what's fascinating about the inscription, and if you know anything about Chinese art, you know that writing is such an important, or Chinese culture, I should say, writing is an important part of the culture. It's clear that the person who commissioned this object expected that when we walked up to it, we, of course, would be able to understand Chinese, so speaking to a fellow Chinese person, and would have a context for the information that they are giving us. So, starting off by making reference to Shakyamuni being the historical Buddha, making reference to the importance of Buddhist teaching in China in this period, but then really getting down to the specifics, giving us exactly when and where and how this object was created. I mean, as art historians, this is the kind of thing we always want to know, right? So it's not always that you'll walk into a museum and see an object that's 1,500 years old that has a precise date of creation. But in this case, monk Zhilang was kind enough to include in the inscription that he was a monk of the Dragon Mountain Temple, that this was created in the precise reign year of the Wei Emperor, gives us the date of 548 CE. And he even gives the exact date on which the stele was commissioned. So he says the ninth day of the ninth month. Now, we might be tempted to think that that means September 9th, a day that's just passed for us. But because, of course, they're using the lunar calendar, this year that would wind up being October 25th. But the double nines, that was a auspicious festival day. So we have a really clear picture of the circumstances under which this object gets made. And it even explains that after this monk, he's been meditating on the Four Noble Truths, the central precepts of Buddhism. He rounded up all of the patron officials to make offerings. So he gathered everyone together to get the money together to create the stele. I also like that he mentions that it was completed in a short span of time. You know, we always wonder those things about the material making of these objects. Well, he's attesting to this not having taken a terribly long amount of time to make. Also, of course, we have, if you notice, the lights just got darker. That's because I'm in the classroom and apparently it's decided that I'm not moving enough. It's turning the lights off. He also explains that he hopes the images can endure for kalpas or eons and remain imperishable. And he was right about that. I mean, maybe not eons, but certainly it's lasted more than a millennium. And he ends by saying he hopes that the blessings and felicity brought from making these images can be transferred to the emperor, sages of the past, their fathers, sons, teachers, and mothers, and all their living and deceased relatives. So what's interesting to me, and I'm someone who specializes in Italian Renaissance art, is how clearly on this inscription it's laid out the different means of practicing Buddhism among monks at this time in this place. He says, we build stupas to mark our devotion. Those are shrines containing objects relating to the historical Buddha's life. So you have physical structures that are built. We create images to express our dedication, like this one. And they also say we transcribe the words. So it's these structures, its images, its words, all of them together contributing, and then also drawing down blessings on those who do that work. And it's also interesting in the light of Chinese culture, how there's a very hierarchical system under which he understands those blessings will be distributed. The emperor first, and sort of filtering down to everyone else after that. So it's really just extraordinary how much this object gives to you. And obviously, like I said, it's expecting us to bring a lot. It's expecting our knowledge, us to be literate, to understand Chinese, to have a certain context for not just the image on the front, but also the other images that are on the other three sides. So I'm not going to talk about these in great depth, only because I know it's really hard for us to see them. And it's a challenge even to see them in person, and certainly on a screen, it's a little bit of a struggle. But if we're looking on the left side of the stele, the incised carvings there are telling a story from a Jataka. And a Jataka, they are the stories of the past lives of the Buddha. So there's the historical Buddha, but Buddhists understand that he had lived lives before that, before he reached the one in which he found enlightenment. And that particular Jataka is telling the story of a prince, Vasantara, who gives up all of his worldly goods, up to and including his wife and children. On the back of the stele, there is a scene from the life of Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha. And in it, he is, again, a young and wealthy prince, and he's renouncing all of the trappings of his noble lifestyle. And in this particular episode, he is sending away his favorite horse and his favorite groom. So you might be able to make out in the center of that image, the horse is bowing its head before its master, before being sent away. And then there's a row of monks or bodhisattvas in little niches underneath. And finally, on the right side of the stele, more incisions, and this one more simple, showing a monk in meditation inside a cave with a lot of foliage surrounding him. So one thing that's often asked about this stele is, how do this choice of image, how do they interrelate? So you have on the front the meditating Buddha. You have on the side an episode from one of his past lives, on the back from his historical life, on the right a monk. And from the best, and I am synthesizing what historians of Chinese art have suggested, they work together because the function of this object was one offered as a votive by a monk himself. So it's no surprise, for example, to find a scene of a monk in meditation, because of course, what did monk Zhilang say in the inscription he'd done a lot of before he got this commissioned? He had meditated on the Four Noble Truths. And the scenes from the life of both the historical Buddha and also the Jataka of his past lives, suggesting the kind of renunciation, a lesson that could be learned and offered and shared. So they're not maybe as direct connections as we might expect, but it all comes back, I suppose, to this theme of meditation, which is very lovely and beautiful, especially as we look at the image of the Buddha that's on the front. Although I mentioned that this is carved on all four of its faces, one of the interesting things about this object as an object is how rough the top of it is. So if we're thinking about an object that has this exquisitely carved relief sculpture on the front of it and has these delicately carved incisings on the two sides and the back, and then you look at the top and it's just sort of like, okay, what's going on there? And one of the suggestions that has been made about this sculpture is that it might have been originally larger than how we're seeing it now. So I'm going to take us back a couple of slides to the inscription. And there is a statement on the 9th day of the 9th month, in the 6th year of the Wuding reign, they sponsored 2 steles with the image of Shakyamuni carved in niches. Now this was translated, and there was a note made about the translation that the 2 steles could also be translated to mean a stele with 2 images of Buddha carved in niches. So either we're talking about a commission that involved 2 objects, each of them with 1 image of a Buddha in a niche, as we see it on the front of this one, or maybe this was 1 object that had 2 Buddhas on it. And if the latter case is accurate, it might be that the coarseness of the top of this object is because it was sort of chopped off. And even if that's true, what's interesting about it is that none of the depictions on either of the other sides seem to have been interrupted. So it still presents as a complete object as we look at it. But that might lead you to the question of, well, then why would they chop it off at all? And part of me wonders, like, well, this thing, as small as it is 300 pounds. So maybe they were making some edits and adjustments to make it a little bit easier to remove. You might have caught in the inscription too, there's the geographic information about where the Dragon Mountain Temple was. It's in a province that's in northern China today. But this object, we don't know anything about when it was removed or under what circumstances. We just know that in the 20th century, it was collected by Arthur Sackler and wound up being donated to Columbia, who has kindly made a loan of it to Fairfield University Art Museum. So unless we have any questions in the chat that are popping up now, and I don't see any, you're more than welcome to, I will click in there just to check. You're more than welcome to send any questions you do come up with to my email address, which can be found on the museum website. So that's fairfield.edu/museum. And of course, we encourage you to go to our website and look around at all of the offerings we have there, even if we can't open our doors to you in person right now. We will be happy to do so as soon as it's safe, and you can come look at this wonderful Chinese object in person, and we'll look forward to welcoming you again then. So take care, and we'll see you again soon.